Welcome to Sex Ed with DB. I'm your host, DB. Let's get into it. Here are my top 3 favorite things I love about Uberlube. Number 1, Uberlube makes sex feel a lot more pleasurable. It's as simple yet as powerful as that. Number 2, Uberlube is recommended by leading doctors, and its body-friendly ingredient list is widely used by people with sensitivities to lubricants. And number 3, Uberlube will not stain clothing or bedding. Any spills can be easily cleaned with detergent and water. Get your bottle of Uberlube now with code SEXEDWITHDB for 15% off at uberlube.com. Periods. Half of the population gets them, but we're scared to talk about them. But the thing is, periods shouldn't be a shameful thing. Since half of the world's population gets a period, we should be busting period stigma and shame so menstruators can feel more confident and knowledgeable about how their body works. And how do we lessen stigma and shame around periods? We normalize conversations and education around periods. And what better way to normalize conversations around periods than with science-backed, sex-positive products and services that fit conveniently into our lives? Check out our brand new sponsor, Day, at www.yourday.com. That's Day spelled D-A-Y-E. And use code SEXEDWITHDB for 15% off at checkout when you buy pads, tampons, and so much more.
Ever feel like the wellness landscape is missing something and that conversations are very one-size-fits-all? And that the conversations don't necessarily apply to your experiences? Hi, I'm Dr. Cassandra Dunbar, the host of the Be Well Sis podcast. Be Well Sis explores everything from hormonal health to aging to relationships and everything in between. The Be Well Sis podcast is your home for insightful conversations with incredibly inspiring women from all walks of life. Join us every week and tune into an episode that is crafted to help you thrive physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. The Be Well Sis podcast is available wherever you get your podcasts. Be Well Sis.
Hey everybody, this is a brand new format at Sex Ed with DB, never before heard. Group conversations between me and my team about sex ed hot topics. We're calling it Sexpert sessions, and you're gonna love this conversation. Oh yeah, and if you haven't heard yet, we're doing a brand new segment on our guest episodes called Booty Call, where you can record a little voicemail, go to our link tree in our bio on Instagram to check it out, and you can share a silly sex story with us, you can ask a question, you can tell us a problem that you're having, and we'll anonymously play it on the podcast, and then we will respond to it. So if you are interested in doing that, make sure you go to our link tree on our Instagram and booty call me. And I would love to hear whatever you have to say. Here I am with my amazing team. Hello, all of our lovely listeners. Welcome back to another episode of Sex Ed with DB. But this is a new one. This is a whole new ball game that we have here. And we have a couple members of the team with us today to basically talk about a fun topic or a trending topic that other people are talking about in the news, in culture, in film, in media, you name it. And so we're really excited today to be talking about a New York Times article that recently came out by Peggy Orenstein called "The Troubling Trend in Teenage Sex." And before we dive into that topic, I want you to know the players. Who do we have here today? And you all know me because I've done a million of these. But we are going to get started with our name, what we do for the podcast, and we're going to do an unclothed, betrothed, and loathe when it comes to foreplay, cuddling, and quickies. And so, who am I? I'm Danielle. You know who the fuck I am. You know who I am. I do this every time. I'm the creator, executive producer, and host of Sex Ed with DB. And in terms of foreplay, cuddling, and quickies, I'm going to say that I want to unclothe cuddling. I really love cuddling. I think it's really fun. I think it's fantastic. I need it daily, I would say personally for myself. Foreplay, I'm going to say we know this and I think this is going to come up. Foreplay is sex, right? So like we're going to betroth that. And I'm going to say I loathe quickies. Quickies feel good for who? Not for me, certainly. Okay? I need to really get that out there. And we should really be thinking about that deeply. No pun intended. I'm going to pass it over to Sadie. Sadie, you go ahead.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm Sadie. I'm the producer at Sex Ed with DB. And even though I wrote these unclothed, betrothed, and loathed topics, I'm stumping myself here because I like all of them. I know I want to loathe cuddling. This might be an unpopular opinion, but I feel like,
I'm shocked. Could you
yeah,
explain?
once the main act is done, I am a little bit touched out. Maybe that's just me. I am going to unclothe quickies. Quickies are kind of underrated. Right place, right time. Quickies can work out. And that means I'm betrothing foreplay because I don't know, if you get rid of foreplay, then we should probably quit the podcast. Like without foreplay, what are any of us doing here?
Send in your 2 weeks. You're through.
And I'll pass it over to Kathy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kathy, and I am the communications lead here at the podcast. Have been working with Danielle for 9 seasons now, so really fun to step out from behind the scenes. I am a lawyer by trade and a researcher, and do a lot of work on sexual health. So really excited to chat with all of you. Okay, so my unclothed, betrothed, and loathe. I think I have very similar sentiments to you, DB. I am going to, I think unclothed cuddling. I love cuddling. But I have to betroth foreplay, same as you just said, right? We talk about this a lot on the podcast that, foreplay is a lot of the parts of sex that people with vulvas and clitorises actually enjoy. So that will definitely be the part that I betroth. And then I guess that means I loathe quickies. I think there is a right place, right time. I agree with you, Sadie, but compared to these other two, they're going to have to be the loathe. And I will pass it over to Em.
Hello, I'm Em. I am the social media coordinator here at Sex Ed with DB, and I also do some illustrations and graphic work for the page and also on my own page, and we collab on those. And much like DB and Kathy, I'm going betroth foreplay because it's all there really is for me. Unclothed cuddling, fun, and I'm not a quickies girl, so there's nothing quick about sex for me, so don't need it. Loathing it. That's
we're
the one
taking our fucking time. Yeah.
Exactly. So it doesn't work for me, but if it does for you, jealous.
Yeah, Sadie, respect. Honestly, I gotta take notes as to like what's going on there, but I'm into it. Well, great. Our amazing listeners, we're gonna have like a couple episodes, a handful, let's say, of episodes this season. So get to know us, ask us questions. If you have a suggestion for a topic that you're like, this is in the fucking news, you got to cover this, email us at sexedwithdb@gmail.com. And Sadie, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about an article that recently came out in the New York Times called The Troubling Trend in Teenage Sex by Peggy Orenstein. It's focused around the research of Debbie Herbernick, and she's her entire career has been focused on American sexual behavior, and her recent research has focused on concerns around the rise of rough sex, particularly sexual strangulation among college students and teenagers. So the data around this is pretty staggering. I didn't realize this was such a huge sexual trend at the moment until I read this piece, so I'm excited to get y'all's thoughts on it. But her recent survey of 5,000 students at an anonymous major Midwestern university revealed that nearly 2/3 of women reported being choked by a partner during sex, with a significant increase in incidence among those aged 12 to 17. So this is starting really, really young. The article also talks about the normalization of choking in porn. This is something we talk about a lot at Sex Ed with DB, and its portrayal in mainstream media. So all the way back to shows like Californication to present day more modern shows like Euphoria all contribute to sexual strangulation being widely accepted in sexual encounters. So here's the thing. Despite warnings from experts, including BDSM practitioners, about the dangers of choking, the practice persists and is often not discussed or negotiated beforehand between partners. So that's a really key point, right? This article is not talking about super consensual, mature, kinky sex between adults. Practiced. Yeah, this is talking about teenagers who have not adequately communicated, who don't understand consent, who are jumping immediately towards kind of risky sexual behaviors. And this is the thing that, a lot of people might not realize is that choking can lead to health consequences, including brain damage. So there was this parallel drawn between the dangers of repetitive subconcussive hits in football players, which leads to this thing called CTE, and the potential harm of sexual strangulation. So there's a comparison drawn between the two because both block oxygen to the brain and cause silent long-term effects that may not manifest immediately. So again, this is why that education piece is so important, right? Because teenagers might be doing this strangling thing, the article talks about they might pass out for a second, they might feel lightheaded in the moment, then the feeling passes and they move on, and they might not think of it as anything serious. It's that repetitive brain trauma that it's the mere fact that it's not a huge hit every time. It's that it's a little thing over and over and over again that makes it really dangerous. And, Peggy Ornstein, she's really concerned about this, and she discusses some strategies for addressing the issue. So she really talks about parents needing to step up and talk about this stuff with their teenagers, encourage respectful communication between partners. And she really puts out a call for accountability from the entertainment industry at large to basically cut out glamorizing and normalizing violent sex to teenagers who haven't had a chance to figure out what they actually like in sex. So that's kind of the long and short of it, but I want to leave you with a few key takeaways, and then we can get into the discussion piece. Something really important to note here is that through the research that Ornstein discusses in this article, she's found that certain sexual activities that are just straightforward pleasure giving, such as receiving oral sex and hookups, tend to favor men, while activities involving pain or submission of some kind, like choking, are more common among women. Another key takeaway here is that many young women are reporting fear and concern for their safety during such encounters. And despite the rise in choking incidents, the rates of orgasm among young women have not increased. Another thing we talk about here a lot. The orgasm gap is not changing, even though this sexual practice is spiking. So to me, this doesn't really feel like sexual liberation. It feels like it's more violence against women being couched in maybe the language of sexual liberation. But I want to know what y'all think. And I'm curious, how did this article hit all of you? What were your initial thoughts and takeaways? I'm really wanting to know what you got from it.
So I thought this article was really interesting and really ripe for discussion. So I wanted to go back and look at kind of the underlying study, and I found that Dr. Herbernick has done kind of like very extensive research on specifically this issue of choking and strangulation. She has many peer-reviewed studies, but I wasn't able to find this one yet, which suggests that maybe it's kind of in press still. Because of the kind of description of the population I thought was really interesting. 5,000 is actually like a ton of people to survey like this. And most of her prior research, she has like 45 people in the study. But it is limited, as you said, Sadie, to one specific university, which also kind of made me wonder, not about the underlying research so much, but about the headline. And I think this is part of just kind of the nature of op-eds, right? That it needs to be tied to something that is currently happening. Otherwise, why are you publishing it as an editorial right now? And so I guess basically my underlying thoughts too were like, is this really a trend, or is this something that has been going on for a while? There's some parts in the article that I feel like there isn't really a basis for. Like at one point, Peggy Ornstein says 20 years ago, this was unheard of. and she doesn't cite to anything. She just
It's
says
like
nobody was
maybe
joking.
to you. Maybe you
Yeah.
haven't heard of this.
And so I just thought it was interesting. I don't think that takes away from this being a problem and having all of the issues with like the lack of consent and communication and pleasure giving activities for people with vulvas that like you raised, Sadie. But I do think it's interesting the way that it's framed as like this is a current problem that young people only are having. And later in the article, they do cite to some other studies from Dr. Herbernick, who says that the rates and like gender breakdown of this practice was the same for people up to 40. So I thought that was really interesting as well. So I think one thing to think about is like, what does this mean about kind of the larger culture and how we've been steeped in it for 20, 30 years? Not so much like current internet usage. I feel like a lot of things get blamed on like current use of TikTok. And this might not be a thing that is just like young people, a problem with young people, but a problem with kind of like the way our media and our porn has been for decades.
Yeah, this might be a case of TikTok maybe making something more visible that was always there.
Yeah, exactly. Uh, and the site back to like Californication and 50 Shades of Grey, I thought was interesting as well, because those I don't think of as like Gen Z focused pieces of media. Um, and I am also just kind of wondering like what's going on at that specific Midwestern university. Like, is there a trend rolling through that specific campus? That is like, is it representative of kind of the broader campus culture right now? So those were some of my kind of initial thoughts.
I mean, I just feel like, first of all, like this key takeaway that you mentioned, Sadie, of like certain sexual activities that are straightforward, like that are pleasure giving, like oral, are favored for men or towards men, while activities involving pain or submission, like choking, are more common among women. That line, like that moment, really made me go, am I? Is that also? Am I doing that? Like as a like a educated person who's like really embedded in these kinds of conversations, like I'm not immune to things like that, right? So it did make me think of my own sexual practices and like things that I was taught from a very young age, and how, of course, like if we're seeing these kinds of things in media, because I'm the media bitch of the podcast, right? Like Euphoria, or we're seeing, I haven't seen Californication, but like just like that millions of people see this and then maybe assume as a norm and really want to practice it in their own experience. Or maybe, the woman isn't driving the car in that moment, and maybe it's a man who saw it and wants to experience that, right? So it's kind of this like really interesting self-fulfilling kind of loop, whereas like if you see it in media, you think it's normal. If you think it's normal, you want to do it. You're talking to your friends about doing it. And like, yeah. And then like on that point in the beginning of the article, where if a teen girl is like complaining about being choked in a sexual situation to her friends, and her friends are calling her vanilla or soft, like, yeah, if you're being fucking bullied into being choked, like everyone is susceptible to bullying. Everyone is susceptible to norms and what they think other people are doing. We talk about this in the Emily Nagoski episode, right? Like when people are comparing themselves and their sexual experiences to others, they want to know how many times a week are other people having sex? Like that's a main concern that people have. This is similar. Like people want to know, is my sex too boring? Am I not exciting or adventurous enough? And this is where it can go wrong. And the final thing that I'll say is the BDSM practitioner piece, right? BDSM folks, and I wish there was more in the article about that. There was like one line about that. I just think that if the folks who like invented this in some capacity, or like not invented, but like invented the idea that they want to have kinky sex and also communicate about that, are saying, hey, we don't do this because it's too risky, maybe we should fucking listen to them. And maybe we should figure out a safer way to engage in this kind of behavior without the risk of fucking brain damage. Like there's just so much here. I can't wait to keep getting into it. But those are my initial kind of crazy reactions.
That's like a perfect setup for what I wanted to mention too, because I also thought that was kind of a throwaway line. Like she just says, I don't want to kink shame, but even the kinky people don't like this. Again, with no reference to any experts or anything like that. And so I tried to see if there was any sort of kink community commentary on this. And I did find this Psychology Today article. So take that with a grain of salt. But who was interviewing somebody who was like the Center for Sexual Liberation, something like that. People who are very like publicly kinky and also concerned with the safety issue. And I found this practice that I had not heard of before called breath play, which is sort of like you're saying, the safe alternative to this, which is instead of like actually choking and like preventing airflow, you're sort of like making it seem like you are unable to breathe more in a role playing type way and less in a like physically dangerous way. Which could involve either like pretending like you can't breathe, like doing something just like covering your face with your hand, and acting it out more, or even doing like kind of miming choking instead. And what I thought was really interesting, the article pointed out that that's probably what's happening actually in porn. It's very unlikely that on the sets of porn, like on porn sets, that people are actively being choked because, as the article says, there is no such thing as like consensual strangulation. And you know, porn sites actually are very highly regulated. There are lawyers, there are very strict rules about safety and sexual health and all those kinds of things. And so likely when you are watching porn where somebody's choking, they're actually doing like a miming of it and not actually cutting off the air of the actress. So I thought that was really interesting.
And in porn, are we seeing the thing that we sometimes see in TikTok videos of like, don't try this, or like, you know, some sort of disclaimer? Like, no, like imagine what would it be like if there was a black screen with white text that said, this is pretend, like, don't do this at home. Like, how different would that be in order for people to understand that that act is not actually happening? They're acting. Like, we need to really, I think that's like, to me, such a clear next step of like what would make a huge difference and is a very low lift specifically for porn. But I'm really curious to get your thoughts here.
Obviously many things came up reading it, and one of the things I wanted to talk about was how this is happening with the current state of sex education and how little and the lack thereof. This isn't happening as a result of more comprehensive sex education being readily accessible to young people. So it's like, it's kind of just a point out where they mentioned to the parents being able to talk more open and honestly and to be curious and to offer guidance, even though they probably have no idea. I mean, you know, if I was my parents and I said, Mom and Dad, I'm interested in having sex and like maybe playing with choking, my mom would be like, I have no idea how to help move me through that. So it's again, like I'm saying, you know, we have to start pushing for comprehensive sex education where in schools, so it means everyone gets access, equal access to it, and then including porn literacy, because if you don't have porn literacy, like what is the point? You can teach these young people all about sex, but then they go online and they're like, was that all bullshit in class? Because they don't know how to differentiate, because like you said, there's none of those disclaimers. So it's just really pushed forward to me that this is happening because of the current state and without porn literacy. And if there was porn literacy, kids and younger people would be able to look at these images and be like, probably acting, probably for a certain gaze, and also probably not for me because I haven't practiced open communication. I'm not really good at the basis level of doing things in the bedroom with someone. And yeah, so porn literacy was one of the big things that came up for me. And the second one was that stat or that comment about basic oral things are normally for like men, and these submissive and possibly painful acts are for women. And it's just like, is it like a new wave of like performance? Like we're now performing to be even kinkier, because to just perform that you like sex is not enough anymore. It's like you've got to actually be kinkier. And that's always worrying with the sex positive movement are like 16-year-olds and 13-year-olds now thinking they're not even kinky enough or like scared of being vanilla. So, yeah.
You know, it comes back to we can't have a sex positive cultural push that focuses on, you know, destigmatizing sexuality and promoting pleasure without also providing comprehensive education on healthy relationships, boundaries, and consent. Like, we can't just talk about the fun flashiness of pleasure and you know, kink and stuff like that without talking about the groundwork that you have to put in to make those things enjoyable and fruitful with another person. I think, you know, it's the product of porn being your educator, porn being your primary educator. You start acting out behaviors that you don't really understand, that basically feel hypersexual and totally disconnected from anything actually pleasurable So yeah, it's really worrying, and it makes me feel sad for teenagers right now because it's a lot to wade through on your own without the support of adults. And something the article talks about is how parents are quite literally too shy. You know, it's intense. It's an intense conversation to have with a minor, but when we don't have the conversations, they'll get the information elsewhere. I guess that leads to another question I have. What role do you think parents and educators should play in addressing this trend today and providing accurate information about sex and consent in general? I'm wondering what you all think these conversations might look like in practice, because, we know what a birds and the bees conversation looks like, but how do you talk to young people about stuff that, is maybe a little more intense than we're used to?
Well, I was just going to say that I think one of the first things is, and I don't go into schools, I'm more online, and I'll hopefully be going into schools by the end of this year and like youth groups and universities. But I think we have to have like a conversation with ourselves as sex educators and people who are putting in place these policies and stuff about, there's this whole thing about like age appropriateness sex education, but then there's also like, there needs to be a contextual look at these, like this university that is seeing this rise, that education has to be altered and adapted to what's happening within that context and in that community. Some people are going to be at more risk of seeing harmful porn than other communities for whatever reason. So it's like we've got to look at age-appropriate sex education, but then also what can we do for that community because of its specific context. So that's just what I wanted to say off the bat of that.
That's a great call. I didn't even really think about the fact that like someone needs to talk to the kids at this Midwestern university, like, right? Like maybe, who knows if the study were to be repeated, right? If this survey were to be repeated in an East Coast school or a Southern school, like I'm really curious, like what the data would show. But I think point being, like, yeah, we like the curriculum should be responsive at this school and in college in general, right? Like it would be a dream if all college students in the US had a requirement that they had to fulfill their first semester that was comprehensive sexual health education, where like there wouldn't be any issues as there are in public schools, say, for example, in, 11th grade that I have encountered with teaching porn literacy, where parents don't want it, right? And like, okay, too fucking bad. Your kid's in college, your kid's 18 now, they can legally consume porn, and they already have. So like now is for sure the time. It's well past the time. But point being, like, I think, yeah, this is a really good point of like what the university that but it's hard because it's anonymized. So it's kind of like, oh, you can't like call yourself out. But point being, these students clearly need education and they need it from an expert. And so, Sadie, back to your original question, when I have gone always in private schools to teach, porn literacy to high schoolers, again, because public schools don't have funding and there's a lot more pushback and a lot more red tape as to what you're able to teach when you go into a school. But I have done a porn literacy lesson with, 10th through 12th graders in one class. And we did talk about, okay, let's talk about penis size expectation in porn versus in real life, and what bodies look like, and do we see like different kinds of bodies, or do we really usually see like white skinny bodies, or what does ethical porn look like? And so we definitely do talk through some of these things. I think I've never done like a slide standalone on choking, but I think this article is really helpful to know that the next time I go into a school that it should be talked about. And I think that, it kind of, for me, falls into this category of like kids they don't want to feel like they're not participating in the coolest things, right? And so if choking is unfortunately seen as something that everyone else is doing, that's all the more reason for them to feel like, oh, I want to be choked. I want to choke. I want to experience this. If all my friends are doing it, then I'm a loser if I don't do it. And I think like social norms are huge when it comes to things like this. And so if people are seeing it on TikTok, if they're talking about it, if they're seeing it in an episode of Euphoria, without any sort of disclaimers or extra education, of course they're going to want to try it. And, it is parents' responsibility to get over themselves and to do their own research and to say, maybe it's weird, that I'm telling you this, and it's fine if you don't want to talk to me, but it's really important that we talk about this. And like, you can, chat with your doctor about it. You can chat with X, Y, and Z person. I'll send you an article. I'll send you like something to read, but it's really important that you listen to me because this is actually dangerous. When you think about the words pleasure and power, what comes to mind? If you're a fan, you know my answer will always be the magic wand. But what if I told you the magic wand could fit in the palm of your hand? Say hello to the Magic Wand Micro. The Magic Wand Micro may make you wonder how it can possibly represent a brand renowned for power. But once you turn it on, this impossibly powerful, multi-function, multi-speed massager proves it's a magic wand through and through. Same magic, now in pocket size. Use code SEXEDWITHDB at Lion's Den for 15% off your Magic Wand Micro now. We talk a lot about sex ed, but when we're shopping for products to support our sexual wellness, exploration, and expression, we head to the experts at Lion's Den. For 50 plus years, Lion's Den has been a leader in adult products. Whether you want to explore a new kink or add a little romance to your evening, Lion's Den has something for all. Each location is brightly lit and staffed with the very best experts in pleasure, passion, and romance, so you can feel comfortable and confident in your purchases. Lion's Den is offering our listeners 15% off your purchase in-store and online using code SEXEDWITHDB at lionsden.com.
I'm a feminist, but... The Guilty Feminist is the award-winning live comedy podcast from me, Deborah Frances-White, which explores our noble goals as 21st century feminists and the hypocrisies and insecurities which undermine them. Previous guests include Phoebe Waller-Bridge, Hannah Gadsby, Sindhu V, Emma Thompson, and many more. To listen, just search for Guilty Feminist wherever you get your podcasts. And to get tickets for the live show, go to guiltyfeminist.com.
This article made me wonder, how can we make sure discussions about choking and sex within the sex positive community are supportive and not kink shaming, but also mindful of potential risks? I feel concerned that a focus on not kink shaming, first and foremost, in a lot of sex positive circles might inadvertently downplay the seriousness of this issue, right? A comparison to CTE, that's not small potatoes, right? That's a big deal. What do y'all think about balancing those two things?
I thought this part was really interesting because I get like looking at the kind of studies that they're citing with the CTE comparison, and then later down they also are talking about rates of anxiety and depression. They seem to really be tied to the non-consensual strangulation interactions, which I was like, when you get to the end, they're like, these people are having depressive symptoms. These young women are having depressive symptoms. It's like, well, yeah, because they were non-consensually attacked while they were having sex with somebody. And so I think it does actually like I do think, there are, you want to give people good education and not just be accepting of a practice that might be underlyingly dangerous. But I do think that the kink community is like a really good lesson for this, where we're talking a lot about consent. We're talking a lot about like open conversations between people and the people they're having sex with and their parents. The kink community teaches like those conversations need to be constant. You need to be constantly checking in. Every time you switch what you're doing, every time you engage in a new practice, you need to be having those open conversations. And I think it was interesting that a lot of these physical effects were showing up when people were not having any sort of prior conversations, which, could be just sort of the nature of being a young person and not being comfortable yet having those kinds of conversations with your sexual partner. We talked a little bit about like maybe these practices are better for older people who are more experienced. But I think that is something that I was thinking of in this piece too, is like it just kind of even more strongly shows this need for ongoing conversations and education, because when you're having such strong strangulation that people are blacking out for a second, that's when you're starting to see these physical effects. And if you were having a more open conversation or doing like the breath work or the role play instead, you wouldn't be having that loss of oxygen.
Yeah, it's just interesting because I think I'll always bring it back to comprehensive sex education because that's what we're all about. But like BDSM is often not just about the physicality of it. And I think that's what gets lost in these trends or things that happen, and it's just word of mouth. And there's no like actual education and history and like proper understanding behind these practices. And it's often like maybe more that these people are interested in like playing with dominance and power play, or being like super vulnerable, or like being on the edge and like doing risky things. But it doesn't necessarily mean you have to like play that out all the way. So it's interesting that teenagers are just doing it, because I remember like back when I was a teenager, it would just be about like bases and how far you've gone on bases, and that was like super simple. And now it's like, have you tried this? Have you tried that? Like, how hard did you go? Like, how hard did like spanking was a thing like maybe a couple of years ago that I thought was in my circle we were all talking about, and then it was the choke me daddy meme, and then it became choking that everyone was trying, but no one had anywhere to go to be like, why do people like this, and how do I do it? And there was no one talking about it. So that's why I'm grateful for this article to obviously come out. But I do worry when this article just says, here's a worrying toxic trend, and then there's no like, how are we going to combat it type of thing. Like, these stats are great, but if someone's on this article, it probably means that they relate to it somehow and they need some information about it. And they did mention about, squeezing the sides of the neck instead of pressing down on the throat. And that's a great point. And like Kathy said, role playing and breath play and pretending and getting into a headspace. And that you can only do that when you fully understand what you're trying to get from the experience. Are you trying to get this like vulnerability, or are you trying to role play something and then get like power out of it at the end? Because maybe, you're using this, you're putting yourself as the victim, but at the end of the day, you're in control of. That is what BDSM is often when we're role playing these scenarios. But young people don't understand that when there's just no foundation. So it's worrying, and I wish the article did give a bit more of like what we've already said in this episode.
Super well said. And I just also we're coming at the end of our time here. And I love these episodes. I'm really excited to do more. There's so many interesting topics that we can dig into. And this is a really important one. So I'm glad that we're starting with this one. But there's a line in the article that I just wanted to read out loud because it really, really touched me. And I'm sure it would touch all of you. But women's brains and bodies don't distinguish whether they are being harmed out of hate or out of love. And that line really like got to me, of kind of like, if we really are talking about this in the context of two people who ostensibly connect and like each other, like, we need to make sure that everybody, especially women in these scenarios, are safe and that they are being treated with respect and love and boundaries and consent and all of these things. And if we are just going with a trend without talking about it, without asking, without understanding like our consent and our boundaries, and the fact that this is a very risky behavior, we're not treating women like we love them. And that's a really important thing for us to really understand, and for us to really advocate for not only teaching everyone, especially young men, the harms of this, and that it's completely inappropriate to do this without asking and without talking about it, but also we need to teach young women and young people to advocate for themselves. And if there's anything that they are not wanting or willing to do, that they have the power and the ability to say, please stop, I do not want to do that. And the idea that if you're with a partner who you trust, that they listen to you. So really, really important for us to be teaching like advocacy skills to people as well, in addition to education. But we will close there. I am really, really thrilled for you all to be hearing us and our thoughts and feelings on this article, The Troubling Trend in Teenage Sex. We'll pop the link in the episode description below, so make sure to check that out if you want to read it yourself. And stay tuned for another episode. Our next episode that we're going to be talking about is The Challengers movie with Zendaya, hottest woman on the planet. The world may never know. We'll see. Thank you all for tuning in, and thank you, Sadie, Kathy, and Em. Appreciate it. Our creator, host, and executive producer is me, Danielle Bezalel. Our communications lead is Catherine Cohen. Our producer is Sadie Leegee. Our marketing coordinator is Mitch Coburn. Our social media coordinator is M. Kirsty Frazier. Our music theme is by Hook Sounds. Thanks so much to our featured guests, partners, and listeners. Want to partner with us? Email us at sexedwithdb@gmail.com. Do you have a silly sex story to share, need some advice, or have thoughts on the episode you just heard? Give us a booty call for a chance to be featured on the podcast. Check the show notes for the details. For more sex ed content, follow us on IG at sexedwithdb podcast and on TikTok at sexedwithdb. Want to know your sex toy zodiac sign? Go to our link tree on our IG now. See you next time.